Send it right to the cloud. There we go. So now we are recording. It is, it's Wednesday, the 22nd of July at 6:30. This is the wellness team's second meeting. Tonight, I wanted to discuss some specific initiatives that we would like to launch this school year. We are currently still working to finalize a plan for our schedule and what the return will look like for students. I had a conversation with Superintendent Fox-Alter earlier today. She talked to me a little bit about the portal that superintendents or their designees are asked to work in to submit school plans. What she explained to me is that there are a number of attestations that superintendents have to make, guarantees around certain things that they will be doing within their district. As far as the building level plans and templates for instruction, that's something we're going to be looking at as an administrative team tomorrow and on Friday, and be working over the course of the next 7 days to complete. The document in our larger shared document around scheduling and instruction currently includes 2 models that we're looking at. And the reason I'm talking about this in the wellness meeting is I think the schedule is a foundational piece of this plan that we then build our wellness work around. But the 2 models that I have currently in that document, one is an alternating A-day, B-day schedule. It's a 50% student population plan for each day. I speak frequently with the Southern Westchester Principals Association, and I haven't met or spoke with a principal who has talked about a full return to the building yet. Most are having conversations, not all, about this hybrid type of return. One school district that I know of in Mamaroneck, they're looking at a 30% return because they have some issues with density on a typical day, based on their student population and the size of their buildings. But this is a pretty common approach. And there wasn't a conversation today with some of the local principals about an AM/PM model, and I reached out to Andrew Corsia. He serves as the principal at Horace Greeley High School, just to ask them about the cleaning component and how they made that work. I want to find out because maybe that's something we might incorporate in Pleasantville. The second model in the document that I have is more of a block model. I borrowed that idea from some thinking that folks provided me around maybe trying to create longer periods of contact between teachers and students. Specifically, I had a conversation with Andrew Selesnik, who's the superintendent in Katona-Lewisboro. He shared a model with me, so what I did is I kind of cut and pasted it and put it into our shared document, and we'll be talking about that a little bit tomorrow. In that model, the primary difference is that instead of meeting for 40 minutes, students will be meeting from anywhere between 70 and 80 minutes. There's one significant drawback in that model, is that the students do not see each one of their teachers twice a week. As a result of having the longer periods of time, they would only see the core area teachers and their elective teachers once a week in that plan. And I really struggle with that. I think that even if it's a longer period of time on the one meeting, if you only see them once, I feel like there's something lost. So that'll be a good conversation to have with my team tomorrow that's going to be meeting to discuss the schedule and instruction. And then the last model that I'm going to add in, it's not in there yet, is an AM/PM model that I saw that they're implementing at Westlake. And they've figured out the cleaning part. And the way they figured it out is in the AM, they go with an in-person model for half of their students. And in the PM, they go for a synchronous model with the students who are at home, who are live. So they're still keeping half in and half out. But what they're doing is they're connecting in a live way with each student every day. Some of them in the morning, and then some of them in the afternoon, using technology. One of the biggest things I've had people ask me is like, Joe, the A/B sounds great, but on the B day, when the A students are home, how could they possibly access their teachers in a live way and get that one-to-one work that they would get if they were in person, or if the teacher was available to teach in a synchronous manner? And the answer is they cannot, right? There are some districts who are working to get around that by installing cameras. That's something that we're looking at as a district. We have not made a decision in regards to whether or not we would install the cameras. That would be a massive undertaking for us, locally as a school district. The hardware piece would be around $250,000 K through 12. And the bandwidth piece, which is really the biggest hurdle, having the ability to beam out in every classroom simultaneously while students are logged into our network, would also be a pretty substantial project. So Superintendent Foxalter and Dr. Cameron Fadjo are looking closely at those plans now. And if that is something that we can do, we're certainly going to attempt to put it into play, but that's a little bit of an unknown now. What I would like to build in, regardless of how we open the school year and what the day looks like and how often students are in, is an advisory model. And I had a great conversation with Dr. Mancari, I'm sorry, last week. And we talked about using some funds that exist in the budget to do some training for our teachers. Dr. Mancari has an excellent connection with a local organization that is familiar with doing some of this work. For those of you who are not familiar with advisory, it's essentially small group opportunities for students and teachers to connect and really engage in a variety of topical conversations. I think it would be excellent, for our teachers to develop those types of relationships with students and have those ongoing conversations throughout the year. This is not just a COVID idea. This is an idea that I would love to do, even when, we are virus free and we're not worried about, all the things that we're thinking about now. So I think that is a wonderful idea. There are three main components to launching that program that we need to consider in my mind. The first is the training for our teachers. The second
Is Joe frozen for anyone else?
Yeah, he's frozen.
Joe,
Yes,
we lost
frozen.
Anybody texting him to let him know? I'll text him, right? You texting him, Dee? Okay. Here's my question though. Does anybody have the answer to this one? With all three return models, are we looking at still 50% return of students or 50 or below? Like I got it clear that it's a 50% return on the first model, but then I'm not as clear in the block schedule.
I think everything would be
Partial return?
100%. I'm just not sure what the split is, if it's alphabetically or if it's going to be, done differently.
Hey, Joe, I was just asking the group.
You're on mute.
You're mute.
You're on mute.
You're on mute.
did I get kicked out?
Yes. Well, you were frozen.
Frozen.
Oh, that is so weird. Okay.
Kicked out.
You were like,
All right.
oh,
We're still recording.
okay.
Okay. All right.
So
So
I-
scheduling in groups, right? So groups would most likely be made up using English or social studies classes. Primarily at the high school level, we would do it that way because that gives us the opportunity to hit kids in a grade-specific manner. And the most successful advisory programs that I've either read about or participated in other districts typically group students by grade, and then developmentally, there are different conversations that take place, between a freshman, a sophomore, a junior, and a senior. So the advisory piece is something that I'm very interested in. Dr. Mancari, do you want to talk a little bit about that organization that you connected with?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I do that, I just want to make sure, because it might have been cut out. I think you said you had three main points. I had training for teachers, and then the grouping. I might have missed number 2.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Curriculum development.
Yeah.
One of my experience has been with advisory is that you could certainly purchase a canned curriculum, but you lose a lot when you do that. So I would like to involve community members, students and parents, teachers, members of the counseling staff, all in an effort to develop a comprehensive curriculum that will really be a live document, one that evolves over time, and as we discover all the different, issues that students can engage in conversation about, we can make adjustments to that document.
Got it. Yeah, I can speak to CBC, which is Cognitive Behavioral Consultants. So they've been doing consultation work with us in the psychology department for our DBT, dialectical behavior therapy groups. They also kind of provided some informal consultation on steps A, which is just an outgrowth of DBT. That's we've been doing with the 9th graders at this point. So when I had a conversation with Alicia Dad, who's our assigned consultant at Pleasantville, and kind of mentioned the thoughts about this training for teachers, which we had even prior to COVID, and then talked about maybe some of this could be implemented in advisory, she said she thinks that's a great option. She actually had created some advisory lessons that were like brief 20-minute lessons. So when we talk about curriculum development, I think it's a great place to start. And it's nice that even if not all of the content within the advisory is related to coping skills and coping strategies, at least some of it could be that same language, so that now teachers are using it and students are picking up on it too.
Yeah, I'm thinking for this upcoming school year, and I'm glad you brought up the work that we've been doing in Steps A. I would like to maintain that core training for the 9th graders. I think that now more than ever, having those steps to deal, steps is eluding me now, Jackie. What does it stand for? Skills
training for emotional problem solving for adolescents.
Absolutely, right. So having those skills that come in so handy when you face problems as young people, particularly living through the times that we're living through, are essential. So I would like to really double down on that work, continue to do the Steps A stuff that we're doing with our freshmen, simultaneously introduce an advisory model. And then for our sophomores, juniors, and seniors, I have folks in our physical education department who have expressed to Dr. Mancari, a number of times that they're very interested in incorporating the Steps A work into their PE curriculum, which will give us a great opportunity to hit students in grades 10, 11, and 12. Now, the 10th graders and the 11th graders, have already received the foundational training. So the work that they do with their PE teachers will really be complementary to some work that we've already started. For the seniors, they've done some limited work in PE, but not nearly as much as the sophomores and the juniors. But I think, again, great opportunities. And I would love to see with our PE teachers who begin this work, maybe some of those sophomores and juniors might take some leadership roles because they are familiar, with Steps A to begin with. And I know that a lot of students, when they're involved in this training the first time around, they kind of think they don't need it. They kind of think it's a waste of time, like everything that you don't need in the moment, right? And then when they end up experiencing all the ups and downs of adolescence, having those skills, comes in handy. And we've heard that, from students. And I know that Dr. Mancari has done some post-evaluation work with students to examine what types of skills were acquired. And I think that data was positive. Is that correct, Dr. Mancari?
Yeah, there's definitely an increase in both knowledge of the skills and use of the skills. That's the two things we asked about. So I do have to go through that in a little more detail just to see if there's a certain module or chapter or set of skills that maybe they need a little bit more of. I'm trying to put my my teacher hat on with some formative assessment there.
There you go. There you go. That's great. The next thing that I was thinking about is the way or the ways that we might seek to connect with students given some of the uncertainties that exist, with, let's say, athletics and our extracurriculars, in the fall, to provide students with those connections to their classmates, perhaps on a day, when they're not in the building. And some of the things that I heard in our last meeting and some of the opportunities that I would like to explore, virtual programs like an esports league. I have a very interested group of students who have met with me virtually a number of times to talk about instituting that at the high school. That's something I would love to explore and support. The second thing is one of the families that we were on last time spoke about some work around trivia and maybe open mic nights, just things, to do in a fun way. And then the third is really an overarching idea. And I had a meeting with my department chair people earlier today, and Joanne Puglisi started to talk about virtual meetings with, her National Honor Society students and things that they want to do to provide support and academic help to students. But you're just taking the club meetings that we would have ordinarily run in person for the last 50 years and starting to conduct those online so that students in whatever cohort that they might be in, whether it's an A cohort or a B cohort, can connect with each other and engage in the activities that would ordinarily take place in person, for the duration of time where we're, in some ways working remotely in these hybrid areas. So I'm kind of curious, does anybody else have any ideas about neat ways that we might connect with students virtually with their classmates?
Well, I think during Wellness Week, we had talked about doing things like, what was one, like a talent show online, like a virtual talent show or a virtual battle of the bands, so that kids were playing in their own spaces, but they were playing together and then kind of doing it that way. And it seemed like a fun idea. We weren't able to get off the ground because too many other things were going on at the time, but that was one that I thought could be fun. It's almost like an open mic, but more like ensemble pieces getting together online. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that was one that we discussed.
We also have Spirit Week usually right around homecoming, I guess.
That's
so,
right. Typically like third or fourth week of September, beginning of October.
Yeah, so maybe that's something that we could think about, still branding it as Spirit Week, but coming up with some good activities.
Yeah.
Now, for those of you who might not be aware, just a quick update on the extracurriculars they have information about at the moment. The fall sports season, New York followed the model that New Jersey released about 2 weeks ago. They're going to right now delay the beginning until September 21st. In that way, they can wait and see what happens as school districts open and then make a decision about whether or not it's safe to commence a fall sports program. If it is, the program will just start a little bit later. And the way that they have solved the timing issue in regards to winter sports is they've eliminated statewide tournament play, and you'll only be playing, districts, within Section 1, right? So that's, Putnam County and Westchester County. So it gives students, in the fall, an opportunity to not have things canceled before it's absolutely necessary to do so, if that happens to be the case, which I think is great. Because I don't want students to be defeated right out of the gate in regards to, well, sports are canceled, this is going to be terrible, that type of mindset. Now, if for some reason the governor issues a directive that prohibits sports in the fall, what the New York State Public High School Athletic Association is currently saying is that they would take the fall season and push it to the spring. And essentially what they would attempt to do in the spring is run 2 shorter seasons. That will certainly create a challenge for smaller districts like us that have many multi-sport athletes. In larger districts, you'll find that more student athletes specialize in sports, in like, let's say 1 or 2 particular sports, whereas in a district like ours, if you take a look at the lineups, they're, very similar in each one of the seasons. So that certainly would create a challenge. It's a challenge that we don't have to plan for at the moment. My hope is that we get great data during our early weeks of opening, and that we're able to go forward with a sports program. And if we're not, I think that would be another great opportunity for this committee to kind of reconvene during the school year, and talk about what we might do now that, the fall sports season isn't happening, whether that's planning something virtually, whether we do something in person, like in regards to intramurals, or things like that. I know that Melanie coaches volleyball, and I know I've got a volleyball player at home who will be very upset if, the season doesn't take place. So, Melanie, as a fall coach, What do you think we might do to support students if we're not able to get that season off the ground? Any ideas?
Yeah. I mean, we just had a coaches meeting like right before this, and we were kind of throwing all this around too. And, it's tough because even John Barreline, our AD, was saying, students look to coaches and their teams as, their mental health support too. So it's going to be a huge loss potentially. And, also thinking about too that, and I hope it doesn't come to this, but if our season does move possibly to the spring, there is an overlap with potentially, the spring season, which means, a lot of our volleyball players are going to have to make that choice between our sport or another choice. So it's just tough, but I think intramurals, if it's possible and if it's allowed, I guess, I think would be a great option. I know volleyball, it's something that we're thinking about. It's going to be a lot harder because it's inside and, it runs a higher risk than maybe say soccer or something else. But I think intramurals or just having, like, if we could possibly still do meetings with our teams or just having that access to your coach. I know that Nancy and I have been still having team meetings throughout the summer just to do check-ins. And, I think that says a lot, and that's something that I think all coaches should still be doing. So, yeah, I think definitely just having accessibility to your coach should be an option in the fall for sure.
Agreed. Yeah, that's important. I definitely agree.
I think that is so amazing that you've been having meetings with your team. And I was going to suggest, I know that some club sports whose season was canceled in the spring or the summer had team meetings and also workouts. I mean, I don't know how much the coaches would be able to do, but having Zoom workouts, which obviously is nothing like in person, but it's still keeping the kids active. Some teams have, I know one of my kids' teams had an app that they would use, like a workout app, as a way to guide their workouts. And then they'd have the Zooms to do some workout together and check in. So no substitute for in person, but there might be some other options.
Yeah, I know that my coaches have been so disappointed because the outside leagues and the outside coaches have been able to do things that school coaches can't do, and it seems to not be equitable. If there is no fall sports season, my hope is that the governor will allow us to do something at least in the building, so we might be able to get kids in groups on the field of just working out and being together in a safe, socially distanced way. I just think it's so important, for our children to be connected that way.
So one of just moving away from the sports piece, but just thinking a little bit about connections and creating connections and relationships. One of the things that we've been talking about in our department, and it's been ongoing since the spring, is how do we do an orientation for the incoming ninth grade? We've moved away from the traditional model, right? We don't do link crew. We did more of a, hey, this is your building and these are your people, in terms of some older students who would do groups and all of that, but that may not be. What we did do is hook up with Marianne Flatley and the SOS group. So SOS has done some training, and their whole focus for that group is about making connections and keeping connected and being interested in each other. And so we're going to tap into their group and other students who also want to be a part of it. It's not just SOS kids, but SOS kids being a primary group, to help us figure out an orientation piece. And I think that it may need to be virtual. I don't know what the actual orientation is going to look like, but just trying to think of creating small groups of freshmen, hooking them up to SOS leaders, and then keeping those groups going through the year with an adult kind of overseeing it, but not necessarily implementing programming. But I think it's important to have an adult see and hear what's going on. Occasionally it is a student-led group, but at the same time, it's under our umbrella. So we want to make sure that kids are getting what they need in terms of connection and sociability and learning things like, how do you manage the schoolwork? Because some kids did it really well in the high school during the online experience. Some kids did less so. And that's the thing with the SOS group, it's a really mixed bag. So I think you get that. And I think that it could be a really great way of keeping it going and keeping those connections. I think that as we get more information about what we can do with students, we'll have more clarity as to what orientation is going to look like, what the groups are going to look like, and then ultimately, how do we keep those groups going through the year? And that's going to be a mix of A and B kids. I don't think we're going to be able to do an A cohort and a B, and I don't want that. I think it's important to mix it all so that there are kids that don't typically see each other on an A day will be able to see each other, you know? I don't know.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Rebecca. When I met with Joyce earlier today, we talked about orientation programs.
Yeah.
And really, all of our students this year are going to require, in my mind, an orientation program.
Yeah.
Because the building is just it's going to be operated in such a different way that I think, and kids have gone through so much, in the last 6 or 7 months. I think an orientation program for students in grades 9, 10, and 11, and 12 is at the top of the list of things that I think we need to, put in place as we open up the building. And I spoke with Mary about that earlier this week. And as we work to develop a plan, for the opening of schools, and we utilize superintendent's conference days in a different way this year than we have in previous years, based on the rollout of our new online learning platform and this new environment that we're teaching in. I think it's important, that we schedule an orientation program for each one of those grades. And we can have students who are in grades 10, 11, and 12 play a role in the 9th grade orientation this year, like we typically do. But I think those 10th, 11th, and 12th grade students, they're going to need some extra information from us too, and some teaching and some opportunity for discussion. The day is going to look so much different, than it has in years past for them. And, that's going to be, I think, quite an adjustment. I was doing the math and we were looking at scheduling numbers earlier this week, and it was the math in terms of the number of minutes in a day, and bringing the kids in is not an easy task, given the responsibilities around screening, right? So once we screen students, this is not September 2019. They can't just go hang out in the cafeteria with their friends, have a great time for 20 minutes and then head over to class, before the bell rings. We're going to have a procedure for entering the building, reporting to your classroom, and having a seat at your desk. And one might say, well, Joe, my children, they're not going to come and sit there, so they're going to show up at 3 minutes before the bell rings. If everybody shows up 3 minutes before the bell rings, we're never going to be able to get everybody in enough time to start the school day for every student at the same time, or even in a smaller cohort of students who may be in our A group and our B group, if everybody shows up simultaneously. So that's something we're going to have to look at closely. And I think our students are going to need some coaching, some information, some opportunity for discussion, as we plan what that looks like. Because for each one of our students, although they're entering the same building that they've been in, previous academic years, for our 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, the program's going to be very different. So I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the need for an orientation program. And I think I would extend it even further to include those other groups of students who are going to be just, in a very different environment this year.
Well, and that's why I think that part of this piece in terms of letting kids adjust to what the new normal is going to look like. And I think the new normal is going to be changing every few weeks, potentially every few months, depending on what the information is. I think that's where we need to kind of maybe scale back, and part of the wellness conversation needs to be about the amount of work that kids are expected to do right out of the gate, and how that might need to take a seat back, and we need to have adjustment take the forward seat, and that we can slowly increase those academic expectations, because we need them to adjust. If we're talking about introducing newness to everybody over and over again, then as a teaching staff, we also need to work with that which we expected everybody to be able to know and be able to do by the end of the first week. It may take 2 or 3 weeks, and we need to kind of adjust ourselves and our expectations around that for students.
Agreed.
And I think it's a culture shift, and I think that we need to be okay with that. And that's going to be hard.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking two things. One is we started out talking about advisory, and maybe that might be the place where we actually can begin that orientation.
Yeah,
Use the advisory groups as our individual
yeah,
orientation groups.
Yeah, I like that idea.
A good way to kind of introduce kids into the advisory, and it really is concrete information that I think people would be able to use. And to piggyback, Rebecca, on what you were just saying about the slow to go move, I was just talking to the director over at Lakeland High School, and they're much larger high school than us. But they were talking about using the first 2 weeks of school, believe it or not, as not even learning, but really more about incorporating a lot of these new wellness initiatives and really talking about all of the adjustments.
Technology.
Like that. So, you know, it was a lot of planning, a lot of preparation. I don't know if 2 weeks is, you know, necessary, but they are really looking at, you know, not just walking into the door and say, hey, open up your books, we're going to start the new school year, but really, you know, kind of looking back from March to where we are today and trying, you know, to really fill in the gaps and kind of help students with whatever adjustments they had in getting familiar with the new school year in a very different time.
I like that. I also like the idea of using that time to learn or relearn or figure out the bugs in all the systems that we have with all the online tools and where to click and where to go. And we are doing things. Yes, we are. I mean, with the introduction of Schoology, which I think is a really exciting tool, I think with the excitement of that, it's going to be a lot of confusion for staff and kids. And I think we all need time to learn how to use it, which would be great. And I know that as teachers, we're going to get training on it. So
And along
I
those
really like
lines,
that.
Cameron and George Lamar are currently working to develop some family trainings for moms, dads, aunts, uncles, you know, whomever our children live with, the guardians. Some of those trainings will be activities that can be accessed, you know, on demand, and then we'll follow up with some live activities where people can join and ask questions and really get interactive. So, you know, I think that, you know, we're going to be doing some grade level meetings for families also during the month of August, you know, before we begin the school year. And I think it'll provide those guardians, those moms and dads, those aunts and uncles, you know, with grandmothers, whomever it might be, with great information about this new work, and then where they can, you know, access supports if necessary throughout the year.
Can I also ask, I'm unaware, have conversations been happening in different groups? I don't know if it's appropriate in this group to talk about expectations for students when it's their day to be online in terms of being in class, or because when we were doing online before, the expectation was for students to be there, but not necessarily, like, if they missed it, they missed it. They could watch the recorded session.
So the challenge with an A day and a B day model, and I mentioned this earlier, is that if you're an A day student and you're on a 1 through 9 schedule with your teacher, you know, unless we beam a student into the room,
I get it,
allow them to be able to watch, they can't access their teacher in real time, you know, while their classmates are doing that also. Now, in the model that I sent in, this is a common model that I've seen throughout the region, many districts are opting for 1 day that's virtual for all students. That type of day would be a fully synchronous day, which means that you would schedule periods 1 through 9.
okay,
Teachers would be on at their assigned time during that period of instruction, and the requirement would be that students tuned in when they were scheduled to for that synchronous day of instruction. For me, one of the biggest differences when I think about these proposed hybrid models and the models that we employed last spring is that if we do the A-B alternating day, the student knows that he or she will be connecting with their teacher in person twice that week, right? So there's a whole accountability piece there, you know, that doesn't exist if your thought process is, you know, it's March, we're not going back to school ever this year, I won't see the teacher again. There won't be an opportunity for that person to work with me directly, you know, whereas in both of the models, all the models that I've submitted, you know, there is a significant in-person component of instruction. So I feel like that fundamentally changes the work that's done remotely, whether it's synchronous or if it's asynchronous. So that's something, Rebecca, we're going to work on pretty closely.
Okay.
I'm thinking we're bringing up parents and we're bringing up teachers, and those are two groups that came up in our last meeting, and just thinking about how to support those groups and, kind of maybe getting a gauge from teachers of what could be helpful, because Rebecca, as you were saying, that early week or 2 weeks of adjustment, I mean, that's going to be huge for everyone at school, particularly teachers and parents too. So I'm curious if you guys have thoughts on that, especially since we have some teachers who weren't here in the last meeting. I think all the parents here were here at the last meeting, but just curious.
Excuse me.
Like teachers, do you have a sense of what could be helpful for you on the wellness front?
So like, as we're chatting and we're discussing these different models, the first thing that popped into my head, I don't know how the other teachers feel about this, and I was like, all right, so if I see my kids 2 days in a row and the other 2 I don't see, what are they going to be doing when they don't see me? Are they going to be doing work? Not going to be doing work? What do I expect them to do? Like, from a planning perspective, like, everything that I've done for the past like 20 years out the window, because I can't really do it that way anymore. And from the outside, it may not sound like, oh, what's the big deal? You just kind of figure it out. But like when you sit down, you plan a week. At this point in my career, I kind of know where I want my kids to be on Friday, what I can accomplish in 40 minutes every day. Like, what are we going to accomplish? Even if we do the 85-minute block period. Like, so that's from a teacher perspective. I don't know how the other teachers feel, but my mind already started going like, wow, how am I going to set that up? And how am I going to make sure what I'm asking them to do is not too much to do on their own, but enough to keep them engaged to do the work? That's like a fine line. And I think other subjects are probably even harder than English, because at some point I can give some read, build upon that when I see them. But yeah, I think it's going to be difficult for teachers.
Yeah, Danielle, I feel the same way. I'm already thinking like, my whole first unit is like collaborative work. So that's just like, to a certain extent, that's kind of out the window. I have to rework that. But the same thing. I have a feeling like I'm going to get confused a lot, right? Like, what day am I on? Who am I teaching today? Like, and then am I seeing them in person or am I going virtual with them today? I feel like it's going to be a lot of having to write things down just to remind myself of like what group is where and how do I dress? Because there are just some things and that you can do really well in person, but it just doesn't translate online. And so like, there's going to be a lot of reimagination of lessons, which is just a lot of added pressure, I think. And not knowing exactly,
What you're
where
doing.
we're going to be a week from now.
I think the Schoology platform is supposed to be helping us with that, right? It's supposed to help organize
Yeah,
us.
but that point that Daniela and Melanie made is a good one. Like fundamentally, you're going to have to change the approach, right? So you're still going to be planning 5 lessons a week, but they can't look the same as the 5 lessons looked like for that class when you knew you were going to have them in person Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. You're really going to have to think about the synchronous day where you get everybody in real time. You'll have to think about the 2 times in a week that you'll see them, and then the 2 times in a week that you do not, if it's that A-B type of model, that we employ. So certainly it requires a complete mind shift. It's a paradigm, shift in terms of the way we've done business in the past and what we're asking you to do now. I would say, and I mentioned it earlier, and I think it holds true, is that the big difference between an approach that we're going to adopt in the fall versus what we did in the spring is you'll have that opportunity to actually see the kids once, hopefully twice a week, to check in and see how those lessons that they engage in when they weren't in your class went, what the progress is, what you might need to rethink and circle back on. And then to get back to something that Rebecca talked about earlier, some of the old benchmarks that we have in our mind, I'm thinking if you're teaching an AP course or a Regents level, math class, you may have to rethink those benchmarks, based on the fact that we know that students missed instruction between March and June of 2020. They'll be beginning school in the fall of 2020. And I think we're going to have to take a prescriptive approach and grab information from students formatively when they arrive in our classrooms, determine where they are, and really start from there, as opposed to some starting point, that we traditionally had in mind for a 10th grade student who was walking into English, or a 12th grade student who was walking into AP government. And then to further make things complicated, as you progress through your teaching, you're not going to be able to move at the same pace. You're going to really have to tailor the work to this very specific set of circumstances, that we find ourselves in.
Well, and I also can only imagine that the pacing between the A and B, like one class of 30 divided into two groups of 15, A's pace and B's pace may be slightly off, and you still need to keep them together. It's not just first period and third period now, it's pacing.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, Joe. So on the like AM PM day for say like period 1, do we have all 25 kids at once, or like how does that work? Because then is it like
yeah, so it was just a model that I saw from Westlake today. And what they were doing is they were taking their A cohort and their B cohort, and they were doing in-person instruction with the A cohort in the morning. Then they would send the A cohort home, and they were doing, live remote instruction with the B cohort in the afternoon. So,
and how would same thing for the AB day, or however that works? Like you would still see like your whole period on A days? Is that how it would work? Or?
Yeah, the timing I didn't work out completely. In our schedule. They run blocks there, but the idea in that model was to provide students and teachers with an opportunity to connect in real time each day, whether it's in person, or virtually.
In person, would it be still those bigger classes?
No, because the density reduction piece,
right.
The State Department of Ed released a document today at 4:51, and it was in big, bold red letters, and it was a Q&A or an FAQ document, and it explained that they are looking for districts to maintain social distance, and not maintaining it should not be the foundation of your plan. Right? So if we are foundationally trying to create distance in classrooms, then it's just impossible for us to put, like in your AP government class, I can't put the 25 kids in your room. It's just not going to work.
No. Okay.
It might be 13, it might be 14, it might be 12, it might be 10. And then maybe in your room, because you've got some limited square footage, maybe I might have you use a different space in the building. Your room is beautiful. It's just not one of our large rooms.
No.
So that,
and I have 18-year-olds that are like 6'5", so.
Right. So therein lies another really, shift for thinking for teachers about space, right?
Yeah.
We just talked about the fact that your instruction looks very different, right? Which is a lot to think about. Secondly, the space that you use, might very well be different because your classroom, if you've got a large group of students, might not be the space I assign you to work in, for that period, based on our desire to create safety. Like, so for example, the math department has the largest rooms, and there's a particular math teacher who teaches very high level courses, and she has the biggest room in the building. But simultaneously, she does not have the largest student rosters, periods 1 through 9. So her space may be used by a member of the social studies department who's teaching, I don't know, AP psychology with, 30 kids in it, as opposed to Calc BC that may have, a grand total of 14 students in it. We may shift that. So that's something we're going to look at. And I think it's another thing that will impact teachers. There'll probably be some initial discomfort with the idea of working somewhere else.
Yeah.
And, this is not a September through June assignment. I'm not making any long-standing changes, in the building. This is just a byproduct of the circumstances we find ourselves in, and a problem-solving model that allows us to get students in, and have them engage in teaching and learning, in a way that's safe. For September, could be different in October, could be different in November.
Right.
It's just how we're going to start.
Thinking back to the advisory model, Joe,
Yep.
where is that fitting? Is that going to be like a daily thing, a couple of times a week?
Yeah. So
During
once we identify the schedule that we're going to use, I think the next step that we should take is kind of to look at that. I talked earlier about grouping it in one of the core areas, specifically one of the humanities, because
Right.
those classes typically meet
Right.
by grade. Our other courses are by and large mixed. I'm thinking about math and science. We've got a lot of mixed classes, and I love the idea of doing the advisory piece in a developmentally appropriate way with our freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors.
Yeah.
So I think that will be what we look at in terms of frequency. That's a good question. That's something I've got to think about. I think once we design our orientation programs and we get the wheels rolling on what the curriculum looks like, we can talk about the frequency of meetings through the months of September and October. In my mind, I'd like to start by carving out, like, let's say, a weekly meeting, and then we kind of go from there. I think the Monday piece, if that's the road we end up going down with the e-learning or the virtual learning for everyone, in a live way, perhaps we look at building something in virtually to start the week and then something in person, on the A day or the B day. That would actually give us 2 meetings. But I think a check-in is really important, right?
Yeah.
I think, I've heard it a number of times, the transition, right? The transition to this new educational plan, for students and for teachers and for parents and for school administrators, whomever, counselors, psychologists. It's a lot to take in, and we want to do it well. So I think it's important that we work with each other. And, I know that Melanie and Daniela talked about, the instructional piece and how that will certainly impact the teacher day. So, a lot like that orientation for students, and the one that I talked about for families, certainly one for teachers where we build in supports, where we harness, the collective excellence that exists in the building. I've got teachers who are very interested in working, alongside their colleagues and assisting, as we transform this work. Just today, I met with the department chair people, and I asked the department chair people to give me some names of people in their department who would want to take on some of this leadership work and perhaps do some planning during the summer months. So if you haven't spoken with your department chairperson about that and you're interested in that type of work, just let her or him know, and I will follow up, and we would love to include you in that, because I think the more that we can get our entire faculty to work as a team, I think the stronger we'll be, throughout the year.
Hey, Joe, it's Claire. I was just wondering, I just want to interject something here. I think this advisory piece is a really great idea, and I think it's really interesting, but I think you're going to have to be very upfront with parents about what you're trying to accomplish with that. And I'm speaking as a parent because I know there are a lot of people in the community who are very upset about sort of the loss of learning time and academic sort of regression as a result of the distance learning. And I think if you don't explain it sort of upfront very clearly what you're trying to accomplish with all the advisory meetings, there are a lot of people who are going to say this is more time that's being taken away from academics and from the academic piece. And we're already concerned that our kids are behind. We're concerned about, are they even going to get enough instruction to, successfully pass the Regents if they're reinstated or the AP. And it sounds like you're eating into even more instruction time. And I think you're going to have to do a real PR campaign with regard to why you feel so strongly that this piece is important. I think parents will appreciate the fact, having watched their kids, struggle in different ways, because I think everyone's child struggled in different ways, about trying to give them a forum and a place to be supported. But I also think you're going to have to balance that with a real sense in the community that there's been a lot lost here academically, and suggesting that you're going to have multiple meetings multiple times a week for advisory is just going to set some people off down a very negative road about that.
That's a great point. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So, and again, I know it all depends on what the schedule looks like, but would there still be that activity period component of our day?
Well, that's certainly time that we could use, and
Right.
that would allow us. And that's why I think once we have the model in place, then we kind of look at time and figure out what would be the best way to minimize the impact on instructional time, and maximize the allowable minutes, in the school day to provide students with all the information and all the skills development that they need academically while balancing that social and emotional component. That's been one of the hallmarks of the guidance, from state ed, is this social and emotional piece. Specifically, just in today's memo for our most vulnerable students, right? So they talk about different types of outreach, to our students who have IEPs, 504s, students who are, our E&L students. So these are things that we've got to think about. And I think Claire makes a great point, right? In looking at how we can do this and not, just slash instructional minutes, that would otherwise be used to engage in core content area instruction.
Joe, I'd love to maybe reach out to George or Cameron or both of them, just to see if maybe the Schoology format could be where we have a wellness page that, just like students would and parents would have access to every course, every single student would have access to a wellness page. We could put community resources, parent resources, all that good stuff, and even maybe a shared calendar with those trivia and those fun kinds of things.
Yeah, I love it.
You can set them up through the advisories too. Like each advisory could have its own page as well in terms of like the work that those groups could do. Because there used to be like competition. Remember this in Brookfield? It would be like competition between the advisories. When we.
I remember hosting pizza parties for advisory teams. I had an advisory in Brookfield. It was awesome.
The tours, and I mean,
Great.
we're just going to have to come up with different activities virtually in terms of the advisory. And they were fun. I mean, they were incredibly silly, but they were a lot of fun and the kids really got into it.
Right.
One thing I wanted to ask about the advisory is just thinking about how it would be done. Sometimes I think about advisories as a space, and I don't know, a space where students can talk about things that they might not otherwise get a chance to talk about. It becomes a trusting group. And I'm just thinking about how that would look for a high school student who's at home and their parent is in the next room, and thinking about what sort of privacy, how open will the students be? How comfortable will they be when their mom's in the next room talking about certain things? And I don't know how deep in this initial advisory phase things would get, but it was just a wondering.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, because I know, like, for example, we have a very active GSA. And I know for a fact that, this year, members of our GSA, which is our Gay Straight Alliance, there were some students, who asked us, who said, I don't want to be in the picture for the yearbook, or I don't want to, there's a leadership conference that I want to go to, but do I really have to get a permission slip signed? Because then my parents are going to know where I'm going, right? They're like, Mr. Palumbo, can you sign my permission slip? So, I do think there's a lot to be said, about that. And there's always a balance that we look to strike there. So perhaps some of it could be virtual and some of it could be in person. And, we find a healthy mix there to give kids the safe spaces that they need to have conversations that are very important to them.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point.
Yeah, maybe the stuff that happens in person is more of kind of like the debriefing of the lesson that was delivered virtually. So it's a little more kind of teaching in the virtual format.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
The skills would be in the virtual, and then the process would be in person.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the groups that Allie conducts where they pass around. Has anyone been to one of the GSA meetings? They pass around the speaking stick, and then they.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty neat. And like to Jill's point, a lot of things come out in those conversations that you might not even plan for, when you start to dream up the lesson or the framework for the discussion that day. And that's why it's also so important. I think Rebecca made the point earlier that we have adults there, so that if something gets kicked up that warrants conversation, with an adult around something a student has experienced, or something they want to share or help that they might need, there is someone, who's there and can provide them with some assistance. So that's really the true benefit of connecting our staff and members of our clinical team and our counselors, with students in this very important way.
I know too, Joe, just thinking out loud here, a couple of my seniors had mentioned this last year that they're a little nervous sometimes to talk in front of their like set classes, like, you know, about sensitive topics that come up, like, you know, say during current events. So that's why I'm thinking that maybe, again, this all depends on scheduling and everything. If it would be possible to have like a set advisory group that maybe isn't like, you know, my period 3 AP Gov or something. I just worry that kids might feel uncomfortable like sharing with their student or their peers about a sensitive topic, and then the next day talking like right back into curriculum. So that's just something I'm just thinking about, just what seniors had said in the past.
You have to think about that, like how we would make that work, like how we would group students. Yeah, that's because like the group that I was referring to, a lot of those students had close relationships, you know, so maybe they would be willing to share more because they feel comfortable around the people who are also part of that group. Like that's an interesting one. That's tough.
Yeah.
That's a tough one to think about.
Yeah.
As a parent, I would echo that concern because I can see they want to have a certain image in front of certain kids, and you know, it's
That's a tough one. I got to think about that.
I agree with that too as a parent.
Jackie, would you say there would be an opportunity to kind of have like the one size fits all type of a advisory for like information providing, or, you know, and then when you have your processing group where it might require a little bit more of student interaction, maybe that piece became a little bit more voluntary. And the reason why I'm thinking about that is for those students who don't want to be in the talking phase of it. Yeah, you gave them the skills, you gave them the information, you gave them the resources. For those students who are not then in that feeling of wanting to kind of take it to the next level, then they didn't have to, I don't know, is that a possibility or?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. I think that the part that you're kind of referring to as like this process, I think we just have to be really careful because it's not counseling groups, right? So as much as we would want the students maybe when they are live, or as you're saying, maybe that's more the voluntary part, to be able to talk about things, you know, like I'm thinking of a Steps A lesson that can be 40 minutes. And typically the way you'd want to break it up is you teach the skill, and then maybe students are doing role plays or giving examples. So, you know, I agree with that. And I also just want to caution like that it's not process feeling, you know, it's not counseling. Yeah.
It's a tough one.
Because teachers wouldn't want to, I would imagine, be doing counseling. I mean, that was the feedback Daniela gave last week, that there's a desire for a little bit more structure. And I think even with that second kind of format of more processing, there can be a lot of structure to that. Like teachers almost giving an example that they have prepared of use of the skill, you know, in their own lives. And it doesn't have to be personal. And then just asking for a couple of volunteers to give examples that they've used.
This year, when we did Steps A in the grade, what you're talking about, Jackie, worked really nicely. You know, Dana would go over a skill. You know, I had to role play with her one day and kind of show her the skill. And then she put the kids into like these mini groups, and they had to come up with this little skit. And there's that initial like hesitation on some of the kids' part. But I think like, since we started the lesson with their English teacher, and here's Dana doing it, kind of, well, if Mr. Franco's gonna get up there and do something, then it's not so bad. And the few kids that were resistant, I was like, wait a minute, I just went up there and made a fool of myself. It is totally your turn. And they stepped away from it. Like it wasn't something that happened to them. It was a very general example. So that made it easier from my teacher perspective, because it was things like I was more prepared to deal with than something super personal that then is like really hard and I don't know what to do with at that moment. And then Dana was there, so that was fine. But
Absolutely. I mean, I think the skills themselves, once people start to get familiar with what they are, we kind of realize that we're using them anyway. And it doesn't necessarily require students, teachers, counselors, anyone to go into great depth and detail about the scenarios in which they use them. It's just kind of basic. pros and cons, for example, is a skill. You know, we've all done that before. So it's just about maybe being comfortable sharing a little bit about that. Yeah.
All right, so I am going to take the notes that I took from today's meeting, try to incorporate them into our document. I'm going to be working to finalize a plan for the schedule. I think once we do, that'll be a great opportunity for this team to reconvene and then look at the model that we adopt. And then also that piece around, the orientation, that is something that I'm working on also with the family engagement team. So there's a little bit of overlap there. So I think that's a great kind of conversation for both of these teams. How do we incorporate a significant wellness component to any type of, orientation program that we create, not only for the students, but also for families and for teachers, because there's going to be a lot of change in the air as we begin school in the fall 2020. And I'm convinced that we'll do a great job doing that. We'll work together. And I'm looking forward to a great September. So it's going to be a different one, but it's going to be in its own way a lot of fun and an opportunity, like Melanie and Daniela pointed out, to really kind of rethink some things. And that's a challenge, but I think we're up to it, and I believe we'll do really good work. So I want to thank everyone for participating this evening. Stay dry. I've got a lot of lightning and rain here in Pleasantville. I don't know what the weather's like where everybody else is, but enjoy the evening. And if you need anything from me, feel free to shoot me an email, a text, whatever it might be, and I will see you soon.
Okay. Thanks, Joe.
All right, take
Thanks,
care.
Joe.
Great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.